In the year 1927, a child walked barefoot into the Kentucky woods at dusk and was never seen again. Her name was Mary Ellen Cross, 7 years old, hair tied with a red ribbon. Her father said she'd been playing near the churchyard. Her mother swore she'd only turned her back for seconds. But when the town gathered with lanterns and hounds, they found no footprints, no torn dress, no blood, just silence. But Mary Ellen was not the first. She was the 312th, and the people of Ashford Hollow stopped counting after that. Between 1899 and 1927, 312 men, women, and children vanished in this secluded religious enclave. Families erased, orphans gone from their beds, choir singers missing after rehearsals, farmers abandoned in their fields, always without a trace. Official records call them voluntary departures. Local ledgers simply leave their names blank. But in the locked archives of Kentucky State Asylum, hidden in dust and mold, whispers speak of something darker, a secret doctrine, a ritual buried beneath the hymns and sermons of Ashford Hollow's most devout. This is not folklore. This is not a ghost story told to frighten children. This is history, a forgotten history scrubbed from newspapers, silenced in pulpits, denied by bloodlines who still live in Kentucky soil. And as you will see, the truth is more horrifying than the vanishings themselves. Because what Ashford Hollow worshipped was not God. Ashford Hollow was not marked on many maps. A cluster of clapboard houses, a weather-beaten church, a one-room schoolhouse. The land was hemmed by endless forest, its trees so tall they seemed to blot out the sun. Outsiders called it the Hollow, not just for its geography, but for its silence. Founded in 1859 by a breakaway sect of frontier Baptists, the community claimed to seek purity, away from what they called the corruption of modern America. They banned newspapers, outlawed dancing, and burned books that were not scripture. Their lives revolved around the church bell, which tolled not only for worship, but for curfews, funerals, and the marking of each passing season. First, it was ordinary. Farming, prayer, births, and burials. But in whispers, travelers said the town's sermons were different. That in the old stone church, beneath hymns sung in plain voices, there was a second language, harsh, guttural, not written anywhere. Visitors described women staring too long, children too quiet, elders murmuring prayers that seemed more like bargains. And sometimes, when night fell and the bell rang at midnight, people claimed the entire hollow lit candles and walked into the woods, singing in a single endless voice. The state of Kentucky dismissed these stories as rural eccentricities. But families living near the borders began to notice strange patterns. Strangers wandering the roads at dawn, their eyes blank. Livestock found slaughtered but not eaten. Orphans moved into Ashford's home for abandoned souls, and never seen again. The vanishings began small. First a vagrant, then a farmer passing through. But soon, names in the surrounding counties grew longer. Between 1899 and 1927, 312 lives erased. And Ashford Hollow only grew quieter. In 1931, a young state archivist named William Corbett uncovered a forgotten leather ledger in Frankfort's courthouse basement. Its ink was warped with water damage, its edges gnawed by rats. But its pages contained something chilling. An unofficial list, marked only with initials and dates. The entries were written in the hand of Sheriff Daniel Rourke, who had patrolled Ashford Hollow until his sudden death in 1928. Each entry bore three things: a set of initials, a date, and a small symbol, a circle divided by a vertical line. Dozens of pages filled. 312 entries total. Corbett matched the initials against census data, church rosters, and missing persons reports. Names aligned. Farmers, wives, children, orphans, preachers, outsiders. Some with whole families marked with a single date. The symbol always the same, a circle split down the middle. When Corbett requested Sheriff Rourke's personnel file, he discovered only a single note written in the margin of his final report. Do not enter the hollow after dark. The congregation does not forgive interruption. Months later, Corbett tried to publish his findings. But his article was blocked, his career blacklisted, and the ledger confiscated by state officials. He told friends he was followed, that men in black coats appeared outside his home at night. In 1934, Corbett was found dead in the Ohio River, his pockets stuffed with stones. His discovery buried again. But the ledger proved one thing: the disappearances were real, and someone inside Ashford Hollow had been keeping count. At the edge of Ashford Hollow stood a two-story brick building with barred windows, the Hollow Home for Orphaned Souls. Its sign carried a hand-painted verse from the Book of James. Pure religion is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction. In truth, the orphanage was a funnel. County courts sent abandoned or impoverished children there, believing it safer than the city streets. Records show more than 70 children entered its doors between 1902 and 1926. Fewer than a dozen were ever documented leaving. Testimonies from surrounding towns describe children seen walking in ragged processions toward the churchyard at dusk. A farmer recalled seeing candlelight in the windows at midnight, shadows of small figures swaying in unison. And then nothing. No graves. No adoptions. Only vanished lives. A rumor survived in the surrounding counties, that the church had sealed its covenant through the mouths of children, that each disappearance was not a crime, but an offering. By 1920, whispers of the orphanage spread too far. State inspectors were dispatched. They arrived at Ashford Hollow, but the orphanage stood silent, its halls empty, beds made, no children present. The headmistress, Sister Abigail Marr, told inspectors the orphans had been taken into good homes. But the inspectors noted something strange. In the basement, etched into stone beneath the floorboards, they found the same symbol as Sheriff Rourke's ledger, a circle divided by a line. When they returned weeks later with reinforcements, the orphanage had burned to the ground. One of the few surviving artifacts of Ashford Hollow is a hymnal, found in the attic of a church in nearby Rowan County. Its pages contain both traditional Protestant hymns, Rock of Ages, Amazing Grace, but interwoven were verses in an unrecognizable language. Linguists later compared the script to fragments of archaic tongues, Proto-Celtic, scraps of Old Germanic, even traces of Cherokee syllabary. But no translation was complete. What mattered was the pattern. Every hymn in this second language followed a call-and-response form, ending with the refrain of a single name. The name appeared in jagged, repeated strokes, almost like claws. Nerthus. Nerthus, a fertility goddess of ancient Europe. Mentioned only once in Roman histories as an idol carried into the forest, worshipped in secret, appeased with human offerings. A deity buried in time, never meant to reemerge on American soil. Yet here, in a hidden Kentucky enclave, her name was sung by orphans, farmers, mothers, and preachers in candlelit processions. And the vanishings grew with each passing season. Candle flame flickers out. Black screen. Silence for 5 seconds. By 1910, preachers in Ashford Hollow no longer used Bibles during Sunday gatherings. Witnesses from nearby towns said the pulpit was draped with black cloth, the pastor's voice low, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. What disturbed them most was not the content. It was the congregation. Every man, woman, and child swayed in unison, eyes closed, mouths repeating phrases that were not English. Their chanting grew until it drowned the preacher himself. Former residents who fled claimed the sermons taught not of salvation, but of binding and unbinding. They spoke of the world above, which belonged to the righteous, and the world below, which demanded appeasement. Some swore they saw infants carried to the altar, though no proof remained. Others whispered that livestock were bled inside the church basement, but that eventually, animals were not enough. By 1915, the sermons were sealed off entirely. Outsiders were forbidden from entering. Even visiting relatives were turned away. The bell tower rang not just at noon and midnight, but at intervals that seemed arbitrary, almost coded. And always the vanishings continued. A peddler passing through in 1916, gone. A mother and her 3 daughters in 1918, gone. A farmhand in 1921, gone. Every disappearance coincided with the tolling of the bell. And beneath it all, the sermons continued, echoing words older than Kentucky itself. In 1947, long after Ashford Hollow had emptied into ruin, a pair of spelunkers exploring the collapsed church stumbled upon a trapdoor beneath the pulpit. The wood was charred, but the iron handle still intact. Beneath it lay a cellar. Narrow steps descended into stone. The men described walls carved with hundreds of overlapping circles, each split by a vertical line, the same mark from the ledger and orphanage basement. At the far wall stood a stone altar. Its surface was gouged, stained dark with something seeped deep into its pores. Around it were rusted shackles bolted into the floor. Most chilling were the shelves. They held not wine nor bread, but jars. Dozens of jars, cloudy with age. Inside floated scraps of cloth, tufts of hair, and what one man swore were fragments of bone. The spelunkers told no one for months. One later claimed he had nightmares, visions of children singing in that dark cellar, circling the altar, their mouths opening wider and wider until they split their faces. Within a year, both men were dead. One from a fall in the caves of Carter County, the other by hanging in his barn. The trapdoor was resealed, but the cellar beneath the Ashford Church remains, waiting in the soil. Not everyone in Ashford Hollow supported the covenant. Some families resisted. Records show at least 4 households fled between 1905 and 1920. They abandoned farms, left possessions behind, and vanished into neighboring states under new names. Oral traditions among their descendants tell the same story. They had witnessed the taking. One testimony, preserved in a 1972 interview, came from the grandson of Thomas Delaney, a farmer who escaped with his wife in 1912. The grandson recounted his grandfather's words. At night they came for the children. The bell called, and the mothers wept but did not resist. They said it was chosen. They said it was holy. But I saw them take my boy, and I swore no God would have him. The Delaneys fled, but many others stayed, out of fear or devotion or both. Survivors describe women sewing the circle and line symbol into quilts, men carving it into barn doors, children reciting it like a prayer. The Hollow was not merely a town. It was a covenant, and to break it was to risk not only exile but something worse. No family who remained in Ashford Hollow after 1927 has descendants alive today. Their bloodlines ended in silence. By the 1920s, the state of Kentucky could not ignore the missing any longer. Reports stacked in courthouses. Clergy from nearby towns petitioned for intervention, and journalists began sniffing around. But every investigation failed. Deputies sent to Ashford Hollow reported no abnormal conditions. Inspectors found no evidence of wrongdoing. Journalists who pursued the story either dropped it or were found dead in suspicious accidents. Declassified correspondence from 1949 reveals the truth. State officials feared exposure of religious corruption. To admit hundreds had vanished under the watch of lawmen and clergy would unravel public trust. So they buried the story. Reports were sealed, names erased, evidence destroyed. One letter, written by a Kentucky senator to the governor in 1925, reads chillingly, "The Hollow serves its function. What happens there keeps balance. To interfere is to invite collapse. Let it be forgotten." And so it was. Ashford Hollow dissolved into ruin by 1930, its church collapsing, its houses abandoned. Officially, it became just another ghost town of the Appalachian backwoods. But the silence was not accidental. It was manufactured. Though most voices were silenced, a handful of testimonies slipped through the cracks. In 1951, a woman known only as Ruth confessed on her deathbed in Pikeville Hospital. She had been a child in the Hollow in the 1910s, one of the orphans taken into the congregation's care. Her words, transcribed by a nurse, were broken, but haunting. "They made us sing until our throats bled. They told us she was Mother, the Earth Mother, and that she would carry us into the soil. When the bell rang, we were lined up. We walked down. We went under the church. Some never came back. They said those were chosen, that they would bloom again beneath the fields. I prayed I would not be chosen, and I was not, but I still hear them singing. I hear them in the walls at night. Her testimony was dismissed as delirium. But she had never seen the ledger. She had never known about the cellar. Yet her words matched both. She died 2 hours later, clawing at her throat. The bell of Ashford Hollow was cast in 1860, shipped from Pennsylvania, and inscribed with a phrase in Latin, Vox Domini percutit terras. The voice of the Lord strikes the earth. Locals swore the bell's tone was unnatural, too deep for its size, vibrating in the bones. Animals panicked when it rang. Horses bucked, dogs howled, cattle broke fences. By the 1920s, witnesses from neighboring towns claimed the bell rang at hours no one could explain. 3:13 a.m., 11:27 p.m., even during funerals when the church stood empty. After the hollow's collapse, the bell was removed and stored in a county warehouse. Workers complained of migraines, nosebleeds, and night terrors. One guard claimed the bell rang by itself during a thunderstorm, though the clapper had been removed. In 1953, the bell was quietly melted down, or so records claim. Some believe its metal was recast into smaller bells, still hanging in Appalachian chapels today. And when they ring, people vanish. Piecing together fragments from hymns, testimonies, and the ledger, historians believe the people of Ashford Hollow practiced a recurring ritual, one tied to the vanishings. At midnight, when the bell tolled, the chosen were brought into the church cellar. Candles were lit, hymns sung in the forgotten tongue. The circle and line was drawn onto foreheads with ash. Then, as chants rose, the chosen were given to Nerthus. What this meant is uncertain. Some believe human sacrifice. Others think the chosen were buried alive in the fields as offerings to the soil. A few suggest something stranger, that the congregation believed the chosen were transformed, taken beneath the earth to serve eternally. What is undeniable? Each ritual aligned with a disappearance. And the disappearances followed cycles of planting and harvest, as though the town itself had become a living altar. The covenant was not metaphor. It was law. How could hundreds comply? How could mothers allow children to vanish? Psychologists who study cult behavior point to conditioning. From birth, Ashford children were told the soil was sacred, that their lives belonged to the Earth Mother. To be chosen was not death, it was honor. Resistance was punished with exile. And exile meant not just banishment, but damnation. Without the covenant, one was nothing. This constant psychological pressure broke wills, reshaped morality, and silenced dissent. Families raised children to accept their fate. Wives obeyed husbands. Husbands obeyed the pulpit. The pulpit obeyed the covenant. Fear became faith, and faith became the hollow's weapon. The circle split by a vertical line appeared everywhere. Carved into wood, etched into stone, sewn into cloth. Historians debate its meaning. Some see it as the earth divided, surface above, soil below. Others interpret it as the womb split open, a fertility emblem. A few link it to ancient European symbols of Nerthus, marking cycles of life and burial. But survivors claimed something darker. The symbol was not just written. It was fed, drawn in blood, burned into flesh, repeated until it became not a sign, but a seal. One farmer's diary, found miles from the hollow, ends with a final scrawl. The circle opens when the bell tolls. God forgive us. Mary Ellen Cross, 1927. Her disappearance was the last. After her, the vanishings stopped. Ashford Hollow dissolved within months. Families abandoned homes, the church collapsed, the orphanage burned. It was as if the town had devoured itself and could consume no more. Why Mary Ellen? Why was she the last? Some say she was meant to be the final offering, the sealing of the covenant. Others believe her disappearance broke the chain, collapsing the town's purpose. Her body was never found. Her red ribbon was discovered in the church cellar decades later. Today, Ashford Hollow is barely a scar in the Kentucky woods. Stone foundations hidden under vines. The collapsed church buried under moss. Locals refuse to enter. Those who wander too close speak of strange silences, as if birds refuse to sing there. Some claim to hear a faint hum, like a bell tolling deep underground. Others have seen children darting through trees, barefoot, vanishing when pursued. The hollow is not empty. It waits. In the 1970s, recordings surfaced from Appalachian churches, old hymns preserved on reel-to-reel tapes. Among them were fragments in the strange language of Ashford Hollow. When played backward, researchers claimed to hear English phrases. One repeated endlessly, "The soil remembers." Though the hollow ended, descendants of its people live still. Some changed names, others moved states. Folklorists traced at least a dozen families across Kentucky and Ohio. Many reported night terrors, recurring dreams of being buried alive, or children speaking words they never learned. One family refused to discuss it, saying only, "We don't ring bells in this house." Attempts to publicize Ashford Hollow have repeatedly failed. Articles pulled. Books unpublished. Film projects abandoned. Historians who press the subject face anonymous threats. Archivists find files missing. One researcher swore her notes rearranged themselves overnight, as though rewritten. It is as if the covenant still enforces silence, even a century later. 312 lives, swallowed by a town that no longer exists. A ledger hidden, a cellar buried, a bell melted or maybe not. Ashford Hollow is gone, but the covenant lingers. In hymns, in symbols, in the memories of descendants who cannot sleep. Perhaps the people of the hollow were mad. Perhaps they were murderers. Or perhaps they knew something we do not. That beneath our feet, the soil waits. That it demands. That every harvest costs more than seed. And maybe that is why the story is buried. Because if the covenant is true, then Ashford Hollow did not vanish. It only went underground. Final shot. A child's red ribbon half buried in dirt. The faint toll of a bell. Fade to black.